the best scholars in the world pass through this institute. So I just wanted to impress on everyone how blessed we all are to know Charles Small, to have a relation to Charles Small, to learn from Charles Small, and it's something that, you know, it's difficult to appreciate because Charles is so open and welcoming and welcome, you know, friendly. But I'm telling you, this is somebody rare anyway.
Thank you.
Charles Small.
You're very kind as always. Now my lecture better be good. Anyways, no, it's amazing to have been here with you for the last week and a half or so. You're really an amazing group. There's a really a sense of focus and determination, which is wonderful to see. And it's also, speaking to some colleagues, it's also wonderful that we're coming from different perspectives, different disciplines, different political orientations, and we're engaged in serious thought and discussion and debate and even arguments. And that's what scholarship really is about. The liberal education is exactly this. So it's wonderful to see. And David and I have some ongoing debates, and I think that's what scholarship is. We push each other to make our arguments more sophisticated and comprehensive and impactful. And that's what it's all about. So today I'm going to speak about soft power and the normalization of anti-democratic and anti-Semitic discourse. I think in a way the two lectures that preceded me today, David's lectures today and yesterday, and Yehuda Bar-Lev's work too, kind of set the stage to understanding issues of soft power and anti-democratic processes, and understanding how anti-Semitism is rooted in these processes, the economic, social, cultural, political processes that we're experiencing. Yehuda, in his presentations and the amazing work that his team has done over the years with ISGAP, and before we were working with him, is looking at terror financing and the impact the Muslim Brotherhood has in higher education in the West. In places like Oxford, I mentioned earlier last week that Yosef Kawadawi, the spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood, who argued his entire life that the true believer, the true Muslim, is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. This is the character that started Islamic studies here at Oxford. He was the founding director of the Board of Trustees. This is the friend of Corbyn, of Galloway, of Ken Livingstone. Right? This is the social movement of the Muslim Brotherhood that the Qatari regime has a bayah. A bayah in Hebrew is also appropriate for this phenomenon. But a bayah in political Islam is a spiritual oath. So the royal family of Qatar has a spiritual oath to the Muslim Brotherhood. They follow all the religious edicts, fatwas, and rulings of the Brotherhood. This is the Qatari regime. This is the Qatari regime that has special NATO status. It has very good relations with the United States. It has a very important American military base on its soil. It has American university campuses in Qatar. And contrary to the lies that the American PR companies that Qatar has been hiring lately, they fund American universities directly. They fund K through 12 education, as Yehuda showed. They fund mosques. They fund civic organizations. They fund these organizations, and as Yehuda shows, that Qatar is giving more money to American higher education than any country in the world. So a tiny country of less than 350,000 citizens with the worldview of the Muslim Brotherhood gives more money to American universities than any country in the world. China, Russia, France, Britain, Canada, allies of the United States, pale in comparison to what Qatar is giving to our universities. So how does soft power impact? right? And I think we also have to remember that in part due to the soft power, I think we also have to go back, and we were discussing this earlier, how this has sort of seeped in to American foreign policy, American political and academic discourse. So when Barack Obama goes to Cairo, and prior to his speech in Cairo, if you said that his name was Barack Hussein Obama, you were accused of being a racist. Remember those days? I do. I was at Yale. I remember them well. But when Barack Obama came on stage in Cairo to speak to the Muslim Brotherhood, the American government in this meeting invited the Muslim Brotherhood as honored guests. They sat in the front row of the speech. This was the first time an American president did not go on his first trip to the United Kingdom or to Canada, which is traditional. These were the two large allies in the United States. But he went to Cairo. Invited the Muslim Brotherhood as honored guests. At that time, Mubarak refused to go, even though he was supposed to be at that event with the President of the United States. He was insulted that the Brotherhood was going to be there. The Brotherhood who was threatening to topple with violence the Mubarak regime. And when he went on stage, he spoke. He spoke about his Muslim heritage and his connections to Islam and his life's journey. And he also stressed how, one of the things that I really think had a bearing, and this is soft power in a way, was how he was arguing that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict should be replaced by kind of an American civil rights movement. Do you remember that speech? So the Palestinians are kind of like the black Americans, and the Jews, well, kind of like the white authorities. And this discourse had an impact. This discourse had an impact certainly in Egypt when the State Department helped and Robert is more of an expert than me on this, and David is here, but the State Department actually helped the Muslim Brotherhood run their elections in Egypt. So here is a social movement that wants to destroy Israel, wants to murder Jewish people, wants to subjugate women, wants to murder gay people, wants to destroy democracy, and the State Department is helping them run an election and helping Morsi get elected. Fascinating, isn't it? And the Jews are increasingly, and Israel's increasingly presented in political discourse at our best universities as kind of, like the white people and the Palestinians are the black people, and there's a civil rights movement going on, and they're supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. Fascinating. And this goes back to, I think, President Obama, but also the people that he surrounds himself with, some of the most highly educated, intelligent, successful, Ivy League educated people in the country. And all of his advisors sort of come out of this tradition, the tradition of Edward Said, his good friendship with Rashid Khalidi, sort of this worldview that really perceives Israel as a problematic colonial outpost of the West, kind of a racist outpost of the West, subjugating the black Palestinian people. So, go back to the fact when Edward Said said in 1983 that he was the last remaining, and I mentioned this in my first lecture, but I think it's very important, that he was the last remaining Jewish intellectual, that he was the inheritor to the Frankfurt School of Thought. The Frankfurt School of Thought, progressive school of thought, founded by Jewish intellectuals that were refugees from the Shoah. Refugees from the Shoah. Edward Said is the last remaining Jewish intellectual in his discourse, and he says that the Jewish professors have become fat scribes in the suburbs of America, and that the Palestinians were the Jews, and that the Israelis were the Nazis. And this is the discourse. So in less than 2 generations, Jews were systematically exterminated for not being white, because the intellectuals, the scientists, the philosophers at the best European universities came to the wonderful conclusion that Jews were not white, they were inferior, but what made them dangerous is that they were poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race, and they had to be eliminated. This racist anti-Semitism, based on the finest intellectual movements in science, in theology, in philosophy, lay the foundation for their systematic extermination. Now, the disciples of postmodern thought, of Edward Said and Michel Foucault, and Judith Butler, and all the great intellectual giants, Rashid Khalidi, Joseph Massad, and many others, have come to the conclusion that, well, in the words of President Obama, in the framework of President Obama, the Palestinians were the blacks, and the Jews, the Israelis, were problematic, that had to work things out like the civil rights movement. So in less than 2 generations, we've gone from justifying the extermination because we weren't white to justifying, I'm choosing my words very carefully, justifying the elimination of the state of Israel because we are white. So it's extraordinary in less than 2 generations that this can take place. So how in a way, does this become, how does this become normalized so quickly? And I think, Said, I've discussed this with some people, we're doing some research on this. I think in a way, this is really kind of like old Christian replacement theology. That the Jews are white colonial settlers, have no historical roots in that land. They've usurped the indigenous Palestinian, Philistinian people from their land, and they have to be replaced. So Edward Said, the Christian, Egyptian, though he claimed to be Palestinian, who doesn't speak Arabic, who really wasn't from that part of the world, at least as an adult, articulates this sort of replacement theology. And I think given the legacy of anti-Semitism, that it's embedded in Western philosophy and Western theology, social sciences, the philosophy, this idea take root. This outlandish idea, just like the science, just like the eugenics, just like the theology that divided the world into races, this irrationality that took root, that was at the bedrock of Western civilization, of enlightenment, of colonialism, is, in a way, it's a new variation of Christian replacement theology. But this time it's imposed on the Israelis and the Palestinians. All right. If you guys are watching the news, and I'll touch on this, there's sort of, and we've spoken about this, the rise of the radical left, the radical right, and political Islam, sort of anti-systemic movements that really want to attack the democratic center. And that this is really, at the forefront of what's taking place. David Harris, says that we have to be swivel-headed. Those of us who are concerned about anti-Semitism, particularly scholars, we can't attack this from the left, and we can't attack this from the right. And if we are political Islamists, we won't be attacking it at all, we'd be encouraging it. But we have to, as scholars and as people studying contemporary anti-Semitism and mapping and decoding it, we really need to understand the social, economic, and political and cultural processes that is giving rise to this emergency of anti-Semitism. So those who are fighting it from the right, in my humble opinion, you're doomed for failure. Those who are fighting it from the left and attacking the right, doomed for failure. we really need to understand what is taking place as scholars from an interdisciplinary perspective, just to get a handle on what's happening. And you could even see this being played out in a sense in France, on the streets of France, and certainly on the streets of the United Kingdom these days. And you will see it again in late August and early September in the United States and in Canada and in Oxford. And the encampments shall return, and they are getting ready, and they're going to push it. They're going to push it to another level. Mark my words. I'm not a fortune teller. Mark my words. We see, but they're beginning to plan. And what the Muslim Brotherhood does, they always take 2 or 3 steps forward, and then they take a step back. And they take 2 or 3 steps forward, and they take a step back. They know when. They're very good strategists. They know how to read society very well. And they've normalized the discourse on our streets, on our campuses in a way, and in the classrooms in a way that it's not going away. Some of you here have been sort of, hoping. We had through our discussions, it can't get worse. Is it really going to continue? And I'm telling you, they're going to push. They're always pushing. They're always moving forward. And they know when to take a step back. So what's taking place on the streets of the UK and of France, but of the UK in the last week or so, is really a manifestation of the remnants, or the impact, if you will, of neoliberal globalization. And when I spoke about this last week, somebody came to me and said, "Are you a Marxist?" So I'm not a Marxist. But as scholars, we really need to understand what's taking place and not be afraid to engage these concepts of globalization, of capitalism, right, of social democracy. These are phenomena, these are parts of our society. And as scholars, we need to engage them. And we are living in a neoliberal, globalizing world that is run by basically by a free market, neoliberal approach to governance and to economic development. This is our reality. And if we're afraid to say it because we're ideologically on one side or the other, then as analysts, you can't dismiss reality. This is the reality we live in. In the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the IMF, the World Bank, the G7 got together and they created neoliberal globalization, structural adjustments. All countries that wanted to participate in the global economic system, in the World Bank, in the IMF, if you wanted to do business with the G7, you had to adhere to certain guidelines. And if you didn't adhere to certain guidelines, you were not invited to the party. And the odds are your country will economically suffer, if not collapse. So there was tremendous pressure on countries to adhere to this model of development. And there was this belief that if the state was weaker, there would be more space for free market economic activity. And with free market economic activity, there'd be more economic growth and development. And with more economic growth and development, there would be more freedom, more democracy. But as I said in my last lecture, we learned that the level of fragmentation and marginalization and dislocation between the 2 world wars was so deep that it led to the social, economic, and political conditions that gave rise to totalitarian kind of movements, philosophies, and leaders. And after the catastrophe of the Holocaust and the Second World War, civilized countries got together and said, this will never happen again. We will safeguard our society, and there'll never be the political, economic, and social conditions that will lead to such marginalization, and that we have to protect our citizens from being completely dislocated, because this is not good for democratic societies. So this has been whittled away. The state has been weakened by neoliberalism, and the Islamists, of course, want to destroy the state. They see the state as a vestige of Western imperialism and colonialism, and it has to be destroyed, replaced by political Islam, by the caliphate, and to impose Sharia law or Islamic law on this space. So we have two powerful forces destroying or weakening the state. And if we just focus on education, this leaves higher education in particular, and this is the focus of ISGAP, so I'll speak about this as a case study. But this leaves universities quite vulnerable because universities need resources to function. And if the state is not going to provide the resources for the universities to function and grow, the universities are going to be forced to look elsewhere, for good or for bad, right? Some people believe this is a good thing. I think it's a catastrophe, but that's just me. But regardless if we agree or disagree, this is a phenomenon in higher education throughout the Western world and other parts of the world. Universities are struggling to look for more resources. And in a way, this is where all sorts of corporations, businesses, governments, foundations can play a role in university development offices as they search for more money. So in a way, when Qatar comes along, you know, it's wonderful for the development office of universities because they're strapped for money. They need the resources. So here the Muslim Brotherhood is coming and say, well, you know, Texas A&M, $1.3 billion. It's a great gift. If I was working in the development office and some character came from the Qatari Foundation and offered me $1 billion, man, I'd get a bonus. I'd probably get promoted. I'd be the star of my office. If they go to Cornell University, and this is, by the way, this is what ISGAP discovered. And although Yehuda, I don't know if he's here, not here, Yehuda and his team is amazing. They're amazing, you know, but the odds are ISGAP and Yehuda, we probably found a fraction of the reality. We found $10 billion with a B that the Qataris gave to Cornell University. You know, so how does that impact on soft power? You know, we have Lev and I and a few of us here we have a small center at Cambridge University. We give Cambridge University a couple, I don't know, $2.5 million a year. And we have a wonderful relationship with them. We have a few research fellows, we have an office. It's wonderful. And they want to expand, which is really nice. And they've been very supportive, which I think we're all still a little bit shocked and we can't quite understand why. But they've been amazing. But, you know, if Cambridge came to me and they said, you know, we're going to replace Lev or one of or Mark as our fellow, you know, next year we're going to have, we insist, you know, Mark came from Israel, he's a little bit Zionist, you know, next year we'll have somebody from Qatar come or from the Muslim Brotherhood, right? ISGAP would be gone in 3 seconds because they know it. It's sort of soft power. We have a bit of soft power. But if we have a bit of soft power and we have a few positions at $250,000 a year, which is a drop in the bucket for Cambridge's university, for their budget, can you imagine if we came with tens of millions or $100 million to a university? It has tremendous impact. So this is, you know, functioning in this sort of free market economic conditions. And then in the United States, the state is supposed to be, and there's laws against this, there are laws in the United States that stipulate any foreign donation coming to American universities or to nonprofit organizations from foreign entities, anything over $250,000 or more has to be reported to the Department of Education and the IRS. But the government is so broke, it's broken, there's nobody in the Department of Education to even read the filings. Yale University is one of our cases, and I'll point to it. They didn't file for 6 years as required by law because there was nobody in Washington receiving the filings because the state is underfunded and it's broken. And so this is just one example. going back to the attacks here in the UK, you have, you have the disaster of Syria, and going back, right, which Obama, his administration kept moving the red lines. You have a catastrophe in Syria and the Middle East, in parts of Iraq, Syria. You have refugees going to Turkey. You have the Muslim Brotherhood, Erdogan, turning the tap on and off of refugees, bribing European countries. It's very hot in here, right? Yeah. Is somebody, Martha, could you tell them to turn on the air conditioner? The air went dead. Thank you. I see everybody fanning themselves. So you have 1 million refugees going to Greece. To Germany and other European countries. You have a backlash, sort of a rise of nationalism and right-wing kind of xenophobic nationalism emerging in parts of Europe, in Hungary and Greece, now in France and now in the UK. You have populism in the United States. You also have refugee crisis and a migration crisis coming from poor countries to North America. You have, a changing economy. Part of structural adjustment and neoliberalism was a shift in the way economies function. So in North America and Europe, you have factories, working class jobs disappearing. You have migrants coming in, not regulated by the state, displacing workers in the United States and Canada and Europe. And you have this resentment. When I was at Yale, I became very friendly with I had a secretary and her husband, and I became very friendly with them, and I lived 20 minutes out of Yale, and they lived in a working class town where my friend Will, his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather worked for the same factory. The factory closed. This little town just outside of New Haven was destroyed economically, decimated. And the only good job in this town, 20 minutes outside of this Ivy League university place, was the manager of Walmart. The manager of Walmart. Everybody else at Walmart was making minimum wage. So you had union jobs, good pay. Now everybody's working in Walmart or unemployed. 2-3 generations of people living in the same household, decimated. They all voted for Obama, and then they all voted for Trump. Right? There's this tremendous displacement. And here you have in the UK, you have Brexit as a reaction to this situation. You have people, English people, British people being dislocated, being left behind from this sort of neoliberal bubble that many of us here enjoy, because we're usually on the initiating side of globalization. We're doing well if we're working in universities and we're professionals compared to many people of where we're from. So you have this backlash of working people, there's Brexit, and now you have, since October the 7th, you have strong presence of Islamists marching in the street. On the one hand, they're yelling about the Israelis and they're yelling about the Jews and they're saying horrible things, and the fact that this was allowed to take place in London and Manchester since October the 7th, just like in France and just like the United States and just like in Montreal and Toronto. Harassing Jews, saying horrible things about Israelis, normalizing the anti-Semitism politically. And even the establishment in our Western democracies going along with a lot of it, right? So you have this normalization of anti-Semitism, and now you have this sort of white, radical, English, fascistic potentially, possible with relations to Russia. There's all, the Russians are probably involved, maybe too early to see, but we'll see with Robbins and all these other kind of right-wing racists, nationalists, kind of, orchestrating, instrumentalizing real resentment that exists here with many people, and starting to attack migrants, people of African origin, Caribbean origin, and Muslims. And now you see the Islamists marching on the streets of Manchester and London. You have young, as I say, lads here, they're young lads, armed, using Islamist slogans, threatening white people and Jewish people. So all this to say is that there is this sort of attack on the Democratic Center, and that the Democratic Center has been so underfunded and undersupported. I don't think the state has the capacity to deal with this problem. In the 70s and 80s, when there was race riots in the United Kingdom, there were serious riots here, the state was powerful. There were police programs put in place. There were job training programs put in place to integrate Afro-Caribbean people into the labor market. There was council housing. There was scholarships for education to try to integrate marginalized communities. The state had the capacity and the will to do things. But I wonder now, with this crisis and the fact for the last 40 years, the state has been so underfunded, I don't know if it has the capacity to address this crisis. So then the crisis, in all likelihood, could become exacerbated as we go along. And I'll just also like to say that in terms of Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood, it's really also important to understand that the soft power that the Brotherhood has been using, for Qatar, I think since the Saudis, from 2001 to now, it's really been the Qataris. Before 2001, it was the Saudis. The Saudis have changed their tune for all sorts of reasons, but the Qataris have sort of picked up the mantle of supporting political Islam. But the role of political Islam, again, is to isolate Israel from the West, to move Israel away from the West and destroy it. And then also to use anti-Semitism to fragment and weaken the United States and Western powers. And you could literally see this happening right under our noses. This is our reality now. This is the reality. This is the reality of our inability to take these issues seriously. And it's also so twisted that, progressive intellectuals, I took lectures here from Edward Said. We had these characters in our departments, and we engaged them. And until recently, the Hillels in the United States were trying to have Shabbatons and meetings with SJP to have dialogue, because we never paid attention to what the ideology is. We never thought for a second, rather than impose our wish for a better future on people, that maybe before we do that, we should try to understand what these people stand for. And we have to give people the minimum respect that whether we agree or disagree, these people have a deep, well thought out worldview. It's based on their particular understanding of their religion, of their culture, of their political aspirations, of their, of policy, of military policy, international policy. They're not dumb. They're quite intelligent. And so far, I would argue, much more intelligent than we in the West have been. Because until October the 7th, most of us didn't even have a clue. And I remember, during the uprisings in Cairo, the Arab Spring, we had at Yale University, we had 100 people to celebrate Passover. And we had about 40 professors sitting around the table, and then graduate students. And we used to do this for the Soviet Jewry days, the Ethiopian Jewry days. We used to set an empty chair at our Seder table for those who weren't free. And they put a chair for those who weren't free in Egypt. And all these professors were saying, they were supporting the Arab Spring and the revolution. And these were serious professors, Middle East studies professors. These are not These are well-read, smart people. And I put up my hand, I said, you know, I don't really understand Arabic very well, but I think they're saying slogans that aren't really democratic. You know, are you sure they want democracy? What is there? The illiteracy rates are very high in Egypt. The impact, the influence of the mosque, very important. You know, these are a lot of marginalized people. Do you know what they want? And the question upset people, but there was no answer given. And they would all go home to watch Al Jazeera because they couldn't trust the American news. But if you really wanted to understand what was happening in the Middle East, go watch Al Jazeera. That's what all the intellectuals, or most of the intellectuals, were doing at the Ivy League universities. And of course, as we know, Al Jazeera is a mouthpiece for the Qatari regime. And I came to know Al Jazeera, during the the second Intifada, living in Israel. I had, this was the time of high aspirations of peace in Israel. We thought Oslo was going well, Israelis and Palestinians were coming together as never before. And I had many Palestinian friends, Israeli Palestinians, and I went to, my friends' houses, and they would have English Al Jazeera. I couldn't believe what I was watching. It was shocking. But this was feeding the Islamicization and the Muslim Brotherhood agenda of many societies. And then just going back to this one point, with neoliberal globalization, the state is very weak in first world countries. In other parts of the world, it's disintegrating. It's failing. Societies are failing. So it's a global economic crisis, and we know this play. We've seen it before. And this is exactly what world leaders said will never happen again. We'll always have safeguards. And we know Elie Wiesel tragically was correct. He always said it begins with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. Now it's going to be Muslims in the United Kingdom. And the Muslims, unlike the Jews, there's 300,000 Jewish people in the UK. There's 4 or 5 million Muslim people in the UK, and they're much younger than the Jewish community, and there are more. There's going to be some issues here, like France, like Belgium. And again, if the Muslim Brotherhood is using anti-Semitism and using the universities to wage war against the Jewish people, to wage war against democracy, we know it's inevitable, especially with this sort of kinetic war going on in the Middle East. The soft power is an integral, key element of the war against the Jewish people and the war against democracy. Think about it. There's a kinetic war going on. We're all glued to our phones because we're all being now, exposed to psychological warfare. We don't know when the next attack will happen. We've been glued to our phones for the last few days thinking any minute something's going to explode. That's psychological warfare. So there's a kinetic war, and there's a soft power that's softening up the enemy, literally. And, I'm not saying this as a conspiracy theorist. I know at some level it sounds unbelievable, but again, and I'll come to our reports at ISGAP, read, as David and I wrote a report in 2019 on the Students for Justice in Palestine. Still very warm in here, right? I think the fans are off. Thank you, Aaron. So we did this report in 2019 on SJP, and after October the 7th, ISGAP really came together. I'm very honored to work with an incredible team of people. We've pumped out, after October the 7th, a lot of reports. We have one of our reports was an updated version of the Students for Justice in Palestine, connecting SJP directly to the philosophy and ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to kill Jews. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to destroy Israel. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to destroy democracy. And these student groups are at this, at the forefront. on our campuses. And we, in the Hillels, we're trying to have dialogue with them. As Emmanuel Levinas says, if somebody doesn't see you as a human being, you can't debate, you can't compromise. And the Muslim Brotherhood, they want to kill. David's lecture and expose is crucial. They want to kill Jews. They're inspired by Nazis. There's hadith that says horrible things. We come from apes and pigs and the urine of donkeys. You can't negotiate and have a dialogue with somebody who thinks that about you. Not possible. So this is not, an issue about land. The Jews are the only others that have self-determination in that part of the world. And today is an anniversary, as I've been told, of, maybe when I'm finished you can speak about it, the 10th anniversary of the murder of Christian people in parts of Iraq. Sunday was the anniversary of the 10th anniversary of Yazidis who were murdered by ISIS. And the world was also quite silent on the ethnic cleansing of non-Muslims from the Middle East. Christians and Jews. We heard from Juju Harris and her Libyan experience. It's 850,000 Jews were removed. Christians are removed. So this is all very significant. So just very briefly, then I'll be happy to take questions. So the reports that we published since October the 7th, we did 2 reports on Yale. As I mentioned, we found millions of dollars from Yale that was not reported. I should say that, finding the vice president of Yale, I think I mentioned last time, was a roommate of Rashid Khalidi when they were students at Yale, who was very anti-Semitic. And this is, I found an old email from this character, and I started this research project and found money that was coming into Yale at a time when they closed down. I ran the first research center ever at a North American university dealing with anti-Semitism. Michael Oren was fired, I was fired, my whole team was fired. There was an Iranian Human Rights Documentation Center that was doing excellent work. They were kicked out of Yale. And there was money coming from the Ben Mahfouz family, Saudi terror financing family. And this sort of led to the work. We presented in 2019. At the time, we found $3 billion in undocumented money, and now we're up to tens of billions of dollars of money. Columbia University, we did a report. We also found millions of dollars, and also the infiltration of Muslim Brotherhood-inspired faculty. I was mentioning the State Department. I didn't finish my point. There's a center at Georgetown. It's the most important foreign service program in the country where they train State Department officials. Professor Esposito and his disciples, they're basically Muslim Brotherhood intellectuals running the most elite training program at the best university that creates the path into the State Department, to the United States. So it's no wonder, after this going on for decades, that the State Department is bloody funding the Muslim Brotherhood in elections in Egypt, Libya, advocating the payment of the Iranian revolutionary regime money, billions of dollars in cash, that is being used now. American money is being used now in the regime's attempt to build weapons and murder Jews. Just think about it for a minute. The United States of America, the most important, powerful, perhaps, democracy in the world, soft power, hijacking, I use the word hijacking, if you don't like the word hijacking, certainly influencing discourse about many issues, including Jews in Israel, and a place like Georgetown, being run, the most important program on foreign service being run by Muslim Brotherhood, Qatari-funded characters. And now we're into the second generation of Muslim Brotherhood intellectuals in the United States. It's astounding. So we shouldn't be shocked that from the classroom to the State Department, from the classroom to the encampment, and places like Georgetown and Columbia University and others, and Cornell, I would argue are really, they're just acting as corporations, trying to make money, trying to grow and sustain themselves. And I grew up thinking that, higher education, a liberal education, was something that was quite sacred. It's a space where young people learn to be citizens. And it was supposed to be a space that was challenging, that you would learn about democracy and learn about being a citizen and learn about humanity and respecting difference. But to be influenced by this, hijacked by this, is astounding. And you can see the miseducation of not only the kids supporting Hamas on campus, but the silencing of Jewish intellectuals, the silencing of Jewish students. People are afraid, have been afraid for decades to stand up because they know if they stand up in their faculty, they're not going to get promoted. If they stand up, their children will not be accepted. If their children are not accepted, they're not going to be in the networks that these Ivy Leagues promise your bright future. So we've been unwilling to take a stand because there is a lot at stake. But the longer we remain silent, the more extraordinarily serious this problem is. So we have to speak up. So Cornell, we did 2 reports on Texas A&M. We found $1.3 billion that went to Texas A&M. We uncovered parts of the contract that showed, we found 502 research projects, and in the contract, Texas A&M ceded the intellectual property rights for all of these projects. We flagged 58 projects of having dual-use military, 13 projects dual-use nuclear implications that Qatar owns the intellectual property rights to. Qatar, the royal family was at Hyena's funeral. They housed the leadership of Hamas for many years. They fund Hamas in Gaza and beyond. They have good relations with the Iranian revolutionary regime next door. They have good relations with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban. The Taliban, where women cannot go to school. Women cannot go to school. Where are the professors and the students outraged? Women cannot go to school. But the white colonial settlers, the Jews, this is the problem. What a misreading. So Texas A&M, which is not a private corporation, they're not just out for business, they're not just grabbing $90,000 a year from your children and from your students. They're owned by the Regents of Texas. It's a public university, so the laws are a little bit different and the guidelines are a little bit different. In a private meeting, which nobody quite knows what happened, the Regents, the people who oversee Texas A&M, voted 7-1 to close the campus. And for Texas A&M to close the campus when so much money was being enjoyed by the university, and we know a lot of these projects are integral to the military that's based in Qatar, the US military, and the oil industry. For Texas A&M to walk away from a lucrative space, trust me, we can't prove it yet, but something is not right. Nobody walks away from that. And I'm sure eventually, somehow, the truth will come out. But again, I think we hit on a tip of an iceberg. We published a report called The Networks of Hate, which Yehuda and his team helped tremendously. So we have experts on the Muslim Brotherhood, We have amazing analysts, a team of analysts who know about anti-Semitism, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Yehuda's team, who are forensic accountants and experts in terror financing. And we put together this network of hate. I urge you to read it. We estimate, and Yehuda's work too, we estimate between $500 to $1 billion in assets that the Muslim Brotherhood, that the Qataris are using in soft power. We showed the ideological and political connections in another report, between Qatar, Hamas, and the Muslim Brotherhood. And one report, we show the connection between funding. We worked with experts in machine learning and artificial intelligence that don't exactly know how they do their stuff. But basically, we did all sorts of surveys. We took ADL reports, FBI reports, kind of looking at instances of anti-Semitism and our findings of money. And we were able to show that universities, American universities that take money from Qatar, have more than 300% higher instances of anti-Semitism compared to American universities that are not taking money. So that correlation is very strong and I think very important. So, David said I'm an activist. I think we all have to be activists in a way. And I think we all have agency. And in a way, and I think this is what our program here is really about, at least in the Jewish community, they've spent many years and a lot of money and time funding students to fight anti-Semitism. They gave money to Hillel, ADL, AJC, all the alphabet soup of Jewish organizations gave money to the kids. The kids, they're there for 3 or 4 years and they move on. And they try, they're trying to get most of them want to get a good grade and probably have a good time and get out of there. So what we're trying to do, which was unique, is really educate the professors. You guys, the professors are there for decades. And professors have authority. If we can get courses taught by you and others, for credit, where students can come, all students of all backgrounds can come and learn about this in a rational, high caliber, serious way. It gives the kids space to read and to understand what's going on, what's affecting their lives in real time. And I think it gives legitimacy to the subject matter, and it empowers the students. And the adults in the room are you guys. You're the adults. We can't rely on these kids. But some of them are amazing, I have to say. Some of them are here. And some of them are, exemplary. And the students since October the 7th, and I met a bunch at Columbia, and I met at Cornell and at NYU, what they went through. I thought it was tough. I get insulted by a scholar, I go to my therapist and everything's okay. I'm kidding. These students have been through really tough times, and they rose to the occasion. Really extraordinary. Our Columbia University report, a lot of the on-the-ground assessments was done by kids who organized themselves in the most sophisticated way of doing, serious research. They documented things, they evaluated things, they analyzed things, really incredible. And they were very brave. So I think in a way, if we're silent and if we don't do anything, it has, every action has an impact, and equally, every inaction has an impact. So I think, I call on you, and I know many of you are committed to it, to do and to be there for the students and to be there as scholars and, explore these issues with all of your training and skills and talent, and to do. And to kind of be there for the students too, as intellectuals teaching a subject, but also to have your office door open to them, because I hope I'm wrong, but the academic year of 2024-2025 I don't think it's going to be easier, especially if the war continues, if the war expands. It's going to be rough. All right, thank you.